My name is Reagan Hall, and I was 36 the morning I stood in my own driveway, sipping black coffee, while two strangers took a sledgehammer to my custom kitchen island. My mother-in-law stood on the porch, directing them, acting like she owned the ground beneath her feet. She had forged my husband's signature, drained a line of credit, and decided she was going to remodel a house that did not belong to her. She thought I was too polite to stop her. She thought I would cry. What she did not know was that I am a senior escrow officer. I deal in property lines, clear titles, and undisputed facts. 3 weeks after that sledgehammer swung, she was the one standing on the curb with nothing but a trash bag of designer dresses, watching her entire life get repossessed by the very people she tried to impress. Welcome back to Pana Vengeance, where we tell the stories of women who fight back, not with screaming, but with patience and paper. If you believe that the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest, drop your age in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe because this story proves exactly why you should never try to steal from someone who audits for a living. To understand how we ended up with a demolished kitchen and a mother-in-law facing eviction, you have to rewind 3 weeks. You have to go back to a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in Austin, Texas. The quiet in my house had a specific texture when I returned a day early from a title conference in Dallas. The central air conditioning hummed its steady rhythm, pushing cool air through the foyer. But the geometry of the walls was wrong. I set my garment bag on the floor and let my eyes adjust to the hallway. The heavy brushed metal frame holding my wedding portrait was gone. I walked into the living room. The candid shot of Travis and me from our anniversary was missing from the mantel. My graduation picture had vanished from the side table. In their places stared my mother-in-law. Patricia had curated a museum of her own history, right over the footprint of my marriage. There was Patricia in a sequined gown from the 90s, her chin tilted up. Patricia holding a tennis racket at the country club, smiling with tight lips. Patricia cradling Travis as a baby, claiming ownership of him, even in a photograph. I did not drop my bag in shock. I did not pull out my phone to call Travis at his logistics firm. In my line of work, when you discover a discrepancy in a file, you do not react. You investigate the paper trail. I walked over to the mahogany console table near the front door. The new silver frames she had hung were an inch smaller than my original ones. Underneath the fresh frames, faint crescent-shaped dust rings marked the exact boundaries where my life used to sit. It was a sloppy transition. A meticulous thief would have polished the wood to hide the evidence of the removal. Patricia had been too eager. She wanted the territory, but she lacked the discipline to clean up the crime scene. Resting near a photo of Patricia posing in veil lay a heavy, violet-inked Mont Blanc pen. I recognized the gold trim immediately. I had bought it for her 2 Christmases ago. She had left her tool at the scene. Patricia thought she was staking a claim. She expected me to walk in, see her face dominating my sanctuary, and react like a typical cornered wife. She wanted tears. She wanted a frantic phone call where I forced my husband to choose between his wife and his mother. She wanted a scene she could report back to her friends at the club over iced tea. She did not realize she was trying to claim territory from a woman who spends 40 hours a week untangling fraudulent deeds and hunting down hidden liabilities. The visual invasion of my home was just the opening bid. I picked up the Mont Blanc pen. The metal was cold against my palm. The ink cartridge was still partially exposed, meaning she had been writing something down, not just hanging pictures. I was about to check the garbage to see if she had thrown my wedding portrait away when the brass deadbolt on the front door clicked. The hinges groaned. It was 2 in the afternoon. Travis was locked in quarterly review meetings until 6. The person pushing their way into my foyer was not my husband. The heavy oak door swung inward, bumping against the entryway rug. My sister-in-law, Shelby, backed into the house using her hip to force the door wide open. She was struggling under the weight of 2 large cardboard boxes. The side of the top box read, "Fragile, Fine China," in thick black marker. Shelby wore a pristine white tennis skirt and oversized sunglasses perched on top of her blonde hair. She dropped the boxes onto the floor with a loud thud and turned around, wiping her brow. Her smug expression vanished the moment her eyes locked onto mine. Shelby froze. Her hands hovered awkwardly in the air. She had expected an empty house. She knew my conference in Dallas was scheduled to run through Wednesday morning. Finding me standing in the foyer in my tailored suit, holding her mother's favorite pen, disrupted whatever script she had prepared. "Reagan, you are home early," she stammered, her voice pitching up an octave. I did not offer a polite greeting. I did not ask about her drive over. I simply looked at the boxes of porcelain resting on my floor and then looked back at her. Silence is a highly effective interrogation tactic. People hate a vacuum in a conversation, and they will almost always spill their own secrets trying to fill it. "Mom is just doing a little redecorating to help out," Shelby blurted out, gesturing vaguely at the altered walls. "You know how busy you have been with work. She thought it would be a nice surprise to freshen up the living spaces while you were away. We wanted to make it feel a bit more like a home." Her choice of words was revealing. Make it feel more like a home. For the 5 years Travis and I had been married, Patricia and Shelby treated my house like a temporary starter property. They viewed my career as a hobby that kept me away from domestic duties. They assumed Travis would eventually outgrow both the property and perhaps me, moving on to a grand estate in Westlake, just like the one Patricia owned. I did not argue with Shelby. Arguing validates the other person's premise. My escrow brain had already shifted from observing a bizarre family boundary violation to categorizing a deliberate occupation. I dropped the violet-inked pen back onto the console table. I walked past Shelby, ignoring her nervous babbling, and headed straight down the hallway toward the guest bedroom. The air in the guest room felt heavy, carrying the cloying scent of Patricia's signature floral perfume. The space had been systematically stripped of my identity. The closet doors stood wide open. My out-of-season clothes, my winter coats, my formal dresses were gone. I found them shoved into black plastic trash bags, piled in the corner like garbage, waiting for collection day. In their place, Patricia's designer garments hung in perfectly color-coordinated rows. Silk blouses, cashmere cardigans, and linen slacks draped over velvet hangers. This was not a suitcase worth of clothing for a long weekend. This was an entire seasonal wardrobe. I walked further into the room. The true anchor of the occupation rested against the far wall. Patricia had moved her antique French vanity into the space. It was a cumbersome piece of furniture carved from dark mahogany, featuring a tall, heavy mirror. I knelt on the carpet to inspect the base. You do not just slide a piece like that against a wall. The contractor she hired had driven steel brackets through the ornate wood and bolted the entire structure directly into my drywall. The metal screws were thick and newly installed. You drill into studs when you intend to stay forever. In the eyes of Texas property law, physically altering a dwelling and moving in essential furniture begins to blur the line between a guest and a tenant. Patricia was establishing residency. She was planting roots deep into my foundation, hoping I would be too intimidated by social etiquette to rip them out. I stood up, brushing the carpet fibers from my knees. Shelby hovered in the doorway, wringing her hands together. Her tennis bracelet clinked in the quiet room. "Where is my wedding portrait?" I asked. My voice remained flat and steady. Shelby swallowed hard. She pointed a manicured finger toward the kitchen. "It is in the garage," she mumbled. "Mom said the silver frame clashed with the new aesthetic she is going for." I walked past Shelby again, leaving her standing in the perfume-soaked room. I pushed through the kitchen and opened the heavy fire door leading out to the garage. The stifling August heat hit me instantly, smelling of hot concrete and motor oil. The space was dim, but I spotted the large silver frame immediately. It was wedged behind the wheels of our lawnmower, face down against the dusty floor. Shoving a wedding portrait behind yard equipment is a specific kind of disrespect. It is a physical manifestation of where Patricia ranked me in her son's life. I grabbed the edge of the metal frame and pulled it free, resting it against my car. I wiped a layer of dirt off the glass. I planned to bring it inside, but as I turned back toward the door, something bright caught my eye. Taped to the fiberglass surface of the back door at eye level was a bright yellow piece of paper. In Austin, a yellow notice taped to an exterior door means only one thing. It is a municipal building permit. I stepped closer, feeling my pulse quicken. I read the bold black print issued by the city zoning department. The project description box contained 5 words: Chef, Suite, Kitchen, Remodel. My eyes scanned down the columns of the form. It listed plumbing upgrades, electrical rewiring, and structural demolition. The scope of work outlined on the paper required tearing out walls and moving gas lines. Patricia was not just hanging pictures and moving her dresses into my closet. She had authorized a full-scale demolition of my home. I traced my finger down to the bottom right corner of the document. The city requires the property owner to sign the permit, acknowledging the scope of work and accepting the liability. I own the house. My name should have been on that line. Instead, the signature read Travis Hall. I leaned in closer to inspect the ink. The letters were written in a vivid violet hue. The loop of the letter T leaned sharply to the left. Travis is right-handed, and his signature slants forward in a messy scrawl. Patricia is left-handed. Her penmanship is sharp, upright, and distinct. I stood in the sweltering garage, staring at the evidence of a felony. Patricia had forged her son's signature on a legal municipal document using the exact same Mont Blanc pen she left resting on my console table. Forging a permit is not a simple family dispute. It is fraud. It opens the property up to severe legal consequences. If the contractors perform the work and do not get paid, they have the legal right to place a mechanic lien on the house. A lien clouds the title, making it impossible to sell or refinance until the debt is settled. Patricia was writing checks using my property as collateral. The heat in the garage felt suffocating, but my mind was running cold and fast. A chef suite kitchen remodel is an expensive endeavor. You do not hire plumbers, electricians, and custom cabinet makers without a significant down payment. Patricia had always projected the image of extreme wealth, throwing lavish parties and driving luxury cars. But cash flow is different from credit. If Patricia had the cash to remodel her own Westlake estate, she would be doing it there. Why was she funneling money into a house she did not own? More importantly, how was she paying for it? People do not commit fraud when they are comfortable. They commit fraud when they are desperate. I peeled the yellow permit off the door. The adhesive pulled away with a sharp, tearing sound. I folded the document carefully and slid it into my blazer pocket. I had walked into my house expecting a quiet evening unpacking my suitcase. Instead, I found myself standing in the middle of a hostile takeover. Patricia thought she could bully me into submission by changing the scenery. She underestimated the danger of handing a paper trail to a woman who hunts discrepancies for a living. I pushed the door open and stepped back into the cool air of the kitchen. I needed to know exactly what kind of financial ruin Patricia was running from before my husband came home. I slid the folded yellow municipal permit into the pocket of my tailored blazer. The fabric felt rough against my fingertips. I stood in the center of my kitchen, letting the cool air wash over my face. The house was quiet again, but the silence carried a sharp edge. Shelby was still hiding down the hall in the guest bedroom, surrounded by Patricia's designer wardrobe. I needed a moment to think, to structure a sequence of events that would protect my property title without tipping my hand. Before I could form a concrete plan, my cell phone vibrated against the marble surface of the kitchen island. The screen illuminated, displaying a text message from Claire. Claire is a senior commercial real estate broker in Austin and a frequent client of my escrow firm. We share a mutual respect for airtight contracts and a mutual disdain for country club politics. She was currently spending her Tuesday afternoon playing a round of golf at the Barton Creek Resort. Her message was long. I picked up the device and read the blocks of text. Claire wrote that she had just walked off the 18th green and passed the veranda. Patricia was seated at a premium patio table, holding court over a plate of artisanal cheeses and a chilled mimosa. She was surrounded by 4 of the wealthiest, most influential gossips in Travis County. Claire typed that Patricia was speaking loudly enough for the neighboring tables to catch every word. The subject of her speech was my marriage. According to Patricia, I was an absentee wife consumed by corporate ambition. I had practically abandoned her son, leaving him to eat frozen dinners in a neglected, deteriorating house. Patricia painted a tragic portrait of Travis as a lonely, neglected provider who deserved a warm domestic sanctuary. She framed her unpermitted renovation project not as a hostile takeover, but as a noble maternal rescue mission. She told the table she simply had to step in and manage the household before the marriage collapsed under the weight of my selfish career obsession. I set the phone back onto the marble island. The screen went dark. This was a classic character assassination campaign. In the world of high-stakes property disputes, the party with the weakest legal standing always attacks the opposing party's character first. Patricia knew she had no legal right to alter my home. She knew her son might object once he discovered the forged signature. To neutralize that threat, she needed to build a social consensus. She was laying a foundation of public sympathy. If Travis eventually tried to kick his mother out, she would weep to the country club that her ungrateful son was abusing the woman who only tried to help him. If I complained, I would be labeled the hysterical, unhinged daughter-in-law, throwing a tantrum over a few fresh coats of paint. Patricia was baiting a trap. She wanted Claire, or someone else, to text me the gossip. She expected me to feel the sting of public humiliation. The anticipated reaction was predictable. A normal person would jump into their car, speed over to the country club, march onto the veranda, and cause a screaming scene in front of the Austin elite. That public meltdown would serve as the ultimate validation of her narrative. "Look at her," Patricia would whisper to her friends. "Look at how unstable she is." I refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. You do not win a war by fighting on the battlefield your enemy chooses. You win by fighting on the terrain you control. My terrain is documentation. Instead of driving to the country club, I decided to feed her confirmation bias. People who execute elaborate frauds possess fragile egos. They desperately want to believe their manipulation is working. When you hand them the exact victory they expected, they drop their guard. They become sloppy. I needed Patricia to feel invincible. I needed a red herring. I walked quietly into my home office, leaving the door cracked open. The printer hummed to life as I woke it from sleep mode. I opened a browser and navigated to the website of a luxury high-rise apartment complex in downtown Austin, the kind of building that requires a massive deposit and signals a sudden, drastic life change. I printed out 3 glossy pages of floor plans and leasing applications. Next, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. In my line of work, you frequently collaborate with aggressive legal counsel. I reached into a stack of contacts and pulled out a heavy embossed business card belonging to Richard Sterling. Richard is the most ruthless family law litigator in the state of Texas. His name alone strikes fear into the hearts of cheating spouses and hidden asset hoarders. I carried the apartment brochures and the divorce attorney's card back to the kitchen. I arranged them carefully on the center of the island. I filled a glass halfway with tap water and set it next to the papers to make the scene look lived in. It looked exactly like the aftermath of a panic attack. It looked like a woman who had realized she was outmatched and was preparing to pack her bags. To sell the illusion, I needed an audience. I knew Shelby was hovering in the hallway listening to my every move. I pulled my overnight bag onto the kitchen stool. I held my phone to my ear, pressing the screen to my cheek, though I had not dialed a single number. I took a shaky breath, injecting a tremor into my voice. I spoke loudly enough for the sound to carry down the corridor. "I cannot do this anymore," I said to the empty line, letting a sob catch in my throat. "She is taking over everything, and Travis will not stop her. I am looking at 1-bedroom leases downtown. I might have to call Richard to figure out my options. I just need to get out of here." I ended the fake call and let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. I grabbed my purse, slung the strap over my shoulder, and marched toward the front door. I pulled it open and slammed it shut behind me, ensuring the strike plate clicked loudly. The heat of the Texas afternoon hit my face. I walked to my car, parked in the driveway, started the engine, and drove exactly 1 block down the street. I pulled over under the shade of a large oak tree, turned off the ignition, and waited. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of my front porch. Less than 4 minutes later, the heavy oak door swung open. Shelby rushed out, clutching her designer purse and her cell phone. She was practically sprinting to her luxury SUV. She climbed into the driver's seat and peeled out of the driveway, heading in the exact direction of the Barton Creek Resort. The trap had snapped shut. Shelby had found the apartment brochures and the divorce attorney card. She had heard my fake tears. She was speeding off to deliver the triumphant news to Patricia. The wicked daughter-in-law was breaking. The house was theirs for the taking. Patricia would celebrate her victory tonight, and in her arrogance, she would push forward with whatever disastrous financial scheme she was orchestrating. I waited until Shelby's taillights disappeared around the corner before I started my car and rolled quietly back into my driveway. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the truly empty house. The frantic energy Shelby had brought with her was gone. Now the silence belonged to me. I had successfully distracted the enemy, but a critical question remained unanswered. Patricia was acting with the desperate urgency of a cornered animal. Forging a municipal permit and initiating a 5-figure renovation requires capital. The country club gossip was a smokescreen designed to hide a glaring financial reality. Why was she doing this today? What imminent threat was forcing her to try and steal my equity? To find the answer, I had to rely on my escrow training. When the numbers do not add up, you look for the hidden ledger. You look for the document someone tried to bury. I walked through the kitchen and stared at the heavy fire door leading to the garage. The air conditioning clicked off, leaving a profound stillness in the room. I thought back to the moment I pulled my wedding portrait out from behind the dusty lawnmower. My mind replayed the sensory details of that brief interaction. When I had grabbed the edge of the large silver frame, it felt wrong. A standard picture frame consists of a glass pane, a thin photograph, and a flimsy cardboard backing held in place by small metal tabs. It should feel hollow and lightweight. My wedding frame had felt rigid. It was bloated. The velvet backing board had bulged outward slightly, pressing tightly against the metal securing tabs. There was no flex in the material when my fingers pressed against it. Patricia had removed my photograph to use the frame for her own vanity, but she had not left the space empty. She had stuffed something dense inside the casing to bulk it up. She had hidden something directly behind her own face. I opened a kitchen drawer and pulled out a flathead screwdriver. The yellow plastic handle felt solid in my grip. I pushed open the fire door and stepped back into the sweltering heat of the garage. The smell of hot concrete and motor oil wrapped around me. I walked straight to the wall where the lawnmower sat. The silver frame was still resting exactly where I had left it, leaning against the bumper of my car. I crouched down onto the hard floor. Sweat began to bead at the base of my neck. I flipped the heavy frame over so the velvet backing faced the dim garage light. I slid the metal tip of the screwdriver under the first small tab and pried it upward. I needed to see the secret she had smuggled into my home. I wedged the metal tip of the screwdriver under the first small tab and pushed. A sharp click echoed in the dim space. Before I could pry the second fastener loose, the heavy mechanical gears of the overhead door track groaned to life. The motor whined loudly, and sunlight began pouring into the concrete enclosure. Shelby had returned. She must have forgotten something or realized she needed to maintain her surveillance. I slid the yellow-handled tool into my pocket and swiftly kicked the silver casing deep under the wooden workbench. I stood up, brushing dirt from my slacks, just as her luxury SUV rolled into the driveway. Shelby stepped out, clutching her designer handbag. Her eyes narrowed when she spotted me standing near the lawnmower. I manufactured a bewildered expression, claiming I was searching for windshield washer fluid. She offered a tight, disbelieving smile and ushered me back inside the air-conditioned house. That near miss initiated a grueling 48-hour game of psychological chess within my own walls. The investigation stalled. Over the next 2 days, I became a captive audience to an orchestrated theatrical performance. Patricia and her daughter occupied the living spaces with aggressive casualness. Every time I attempted to slip away to retrieve the hidden documents, one of them would miraculously appear in the corridor. They lounged on my custom sofa, sipping chilled Pinot Grigio and flipping through glossy home decor magazines. They weaponized their leisure to monitor my movements. The matriarch took immense pleasure in delivering backhanded compliments during these forced interactions. She would remark on how exhausted my complexion appeared, suggesting my rigorous corporate schedule was draining my youth. "You simply work too many hours, Reagan," she murmured over breakfast. "A house needs a woman who can actually be present to cultivate its warmth." I swallowed the insults with a serene nod, leaning into the defeated persona I had crafted. Let them believe the fake apartment brochures had broken my spirit. My passive behavior only inflated their arrogance. The suffocating tension finally broke on Tuesday afternoon. Patricia announced they were attending an exclusive planning luncheon downtown to finalize the catering menu for her upcoming society gala. They spent 2 hours applying cosmetics and draping themselves in expensive silk before calling a private car service. I stood by the front window watching the black sedan pull away from the curb and disappear down the residential street. The moment the vehicle vanished, I moved. I walked purposefully through the quiet kitchen and pushed the heavy fire door open. The utility space was still baking in the August heat. I dropped to my hands and knees, reaching under the wooden workbench. My fingers brushed against the smooth glass, and I dragged the bulky casing out into the open. I did not waste time. I retrieved the flathead tool from my blazer pocket and went to work on the remaining metal fasteners. The small securing tabs bent backward with metallic snaps. Once the perimeter was clear, I wedged my fingernails under the rigid velvet backing board and pulled. It lifted away with a soft, tearing sound. The bloated interior contents spilled out onto the concrete floor. The first layer was a glossy photograph. It was a vintage portrait of the matriarch from a 1990 debutante ball. She wore a voluminous white gown and a crown of synthetic pearls. Her smile was arrogant and youthful. But the vintage portrait was merely a cosmetic shield. The true payload lay directly beneath it. Wedged tightly to bypass the glass were 3 thick official documents printed on heavy pink cardstock. The bright neon hue is an industry-standard color code used by county clerks to flag urgent legal actions. You do not print dinner invitations on pink paper. You print catastrophes on it. I gathered the heavy sheets and carried them inside, locking the door behind me. I spread the documents across the cool marble surface of the kitchen island. The ambient light caught the raised seals stamped into the bottom corners. I leaned over the counter and began reading the dense, bureaucratic text. The first page was an Internal Revenue Service notice of federal tax lien. The government had attached a massive monetary claim against Patricia, citing 3 years of unpaid income taxes. The figures printed in bold ink were staggering. The second document was even more destructive. It was a final foreclosure auction notice issued by a regional banking institution. The paperwork detailed the imminent seizure of her sprawling Westlake estate. The bank had exhausted all collection efforts and scheduled the property to be sold on the courthouse steps to the highest bidder. The date of the auction was approaching rapidly. The illusion shattered instantly. Patricia was not engaging in a generous maternal redecorating project to help her busy daughter-in-law. She was a destitute woman fleeing a crumbling financial empire. The IRS had frozen her liquid accounts, and the bank was actively repossessing her shelter. She was bankrupt, hiding from process servers, and desperately attempting to secure a new address before the gavel fell on her old one. She intended to commandeer my residence to maintain her high society facade. I stood in the quiet room, processing the sheer audacity of her scheme. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, but one critical edge remained jagged. As an escrow officer, I solve equations. The math staring back at me from the marble counter did not compute. A ruined woman with frozen bank accounts and a destroyed credit rating cannot afford a lavish chef suite kitchen remodel. The yellow municipal permit taped to the back door authorized structural demolition, custom cabinetry, and high-end appliance installation. A project of that magnitude requires $50,000 in initial capital just to mobilize a construction crew. Contractors demand substantial down payments before swinging a single hammer. You cannot charm a plumber into working for free, and you certainly cannot pay an electrician with a country club membership. Patricia possessed zero liquidity. So where was the capital originating? She had to be drawing the funds from a clean, reliable source. My mind raced through the possibilities. The deed to my property was securely locked inside a single-member limited liability company. She could not mortgage the structure. I monitor my personal credit profile weekly, so I knew she had not opened any fraudulent accounts in my name. If she could not steal from me, and she could not borrow under her own ruined identity, there was only one target left. The realization hit me like a cold winter draft. She had moved into this house. She had unrestricted access to the incoming mail. She possessed a violet pen capable of perfectly mimicking a specific signature. The money had to be coming from the one person who trusted her blindly and possessed an immaculate credit score. I needed to run a comprehensive background check immediately. I reached for my laptop sitting on the nearby dining table. I had to verify my terrifying theory before the sun set. The matriarch had orchestrated a brilliant diversion, but she left a paper trail wide enough for an auditor to follow. I opened a secure browser window and began typing. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling encrypted data from financial registries. I was about to uncover the exact mechanism of her theft, just as the sound of tires rolling onto the driveway announced my husband returning from his corporate office. The low rumble of a vehicle engine vibrated through the floorboards, signaling my husband had returned. I listened to the rhythmic crunch of tires rolling over the paved driveway. A car door slammed shut. Heavy footsteps echoed inside the garage, followed by the familiar metallic turn of the brass doorknob. I remained stationed behind the kitchen island, my posture upright and my hands resting flat against the cool marble. Travis stepped into the room carrying the exhaustion of a 12-hour corporate shift. As a director of supply chain logistics, his daily existence revolved around mitigating disasters, optimizing routes, and maintaining absolute order. He spent his days predicting outcomes for multinational freight companies. He demanded predictability. When he crossed the threshold of our home, he expected a sanctuary, free from chaos. He dropped his leather briefcase onto a nearby chair with a heavy thud. He loosened his silk tie, pulling the fabric away from his collarbone. He approached me, offering a tired smile, and pressed a brief kiss against my cheek. He smelled of roasted coffee beans and stale office air. "Rough day," he murmured, rubbing the back of his neck. I did not reply. I merely watched his gaze drift past my shoulder toward the adjacent living area. His eyes scanned the walls. The physical reaction was immediate. The relaxed slope of his shoulders vanished, replaced by a rigid, defensive posture. He took 3 slow, deliberate steps into the center of the room. He stared at the vintage debutante portrait occupying the space where our wedding memory used to reside. He pivoted, observing the tennis club snapshot and the infant photograph. He surveyed the curated gallery of his mother, invading our private domain. He did not brush it off with a confused chuckle. He did not ask a gentle questioning phrase. His jaw tightened until the muscles ticked beneath his skin. He turned back to face me, his expression hardening into raw, unfiltered anger. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice dropping an octave. "Where are our pictures?" I maintained my steady composure. I did not offer comfort or attempt to de-escalate his rising temper. Instead, I slid the heavy neon cardstock across the polished stone surface. The official documents stopped right at the edge of the counter, inches from his fingers. "Read the top line," I instructed, my tone devoid of inflection. Travis frowned, glancing down at the bold, printed text. His eyes darted across the bureaucratic lettering. He picked up the Internal Revenue Service notice, scanning the staggering monetary figures listed under the penalty columns. He shifted the top sheet aside, revealing the banking foreclosure warning. The anger radiating from his features began to dissolve, mutating into profound shock. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving a pale, sickly hue. "She has nothing," he whispered, the realization stripping the strength from his vocal cords. "My mother is broke." He looked up at me, seeking a contradiction, hoping I would reveal this was a misunderstanding. I offered no such reprieve. "It is worse," I said, sliding my laptop closer to him. The screen glowed brightly, illuminating the shadowed room. Before he arrived, I had navigated the encrypted portals of a major credit reporting bureau. I ran a comprehensive diagnostic on his personal identifying information. The dashboard displayed his exceptional financial standing, a pristine history built upon years of diligent fiscal discipline. However, right below his primary mortgage lay a newly generated trade line. It was an active revolving account opened less than 2 weeks prior. "Look at the origination date." I pointed to the specific row. "Then look at the current balance." Travis leaned over the screen. He read the title of the financial product. It was a home equity line of credit. The banking institution had extended a maximum borrowing limit of $75,000. The available credit column read 0. The entire sum had been withdrawn in a single maximum transaction. "I never applied for this," he stated, his breathing growing shallow. "We promised we would never borrow against the equity." "You did not apply for it," I confirmed, "but someone residing in this house did." I explained the mechanics of the theft. Financial institutions frequently mail pre-approved promotional offers to individuals possessing prime lending scores. These envelopes contain blank checks tied to potential equity reserves. They are lucrative traps designed to entice homeowners into assuming more debt. I intercept our mail daily, but I had been away at a title conference in Dallas. During my absence, Patricia secured access to the mailbox. She discovered a promotional packet addressed to her son. She extracted the paperwork, filled out the required authorization fields, and utilized the violet Montblanc pen to perfectly mimic his signature. She mailed the forged contract back to the lender, initiating the transfer of funds. "She stole your identity," I explained, speaking with deliberate precision. "She committed federal wire fraud to finance her delusional renovations. The contractors marching through our property tomorrow morning are being compensated with capital tethered directly to your Social Security number." Travis stared at the digital ledger, his mind struggling to process the betrayal. The woman who raised him, the matriarch who preached about high society etiquette, had reduced herself to a common financial predator. She had weaponized his trust, manipulating his pristine reputation to fund a fraudulent escape from her own ruin. The shock receded, replaced by a terrifying, focused rage. Travis reached into his trouser pocket and retrieved his smartphone. His thumb hovered over the keypad, ready to dial the emergency dispatch number. "I am calling the authorities," he declared, his voice trembling with suppressed fury. "I am reporting the forgery right now. We will have her escorted off the premises in handcuffs." I lunged forward, wrapping my hand firmly around his wrist. My grip was unyielding, pressing the device down against the counter. "Stop," I commanded, maintaining a low, authoritative volume. He glared at me, bewildered by my interference. "She stole from us, Reagan. She is sitting at a country club drinking champagne while spending money I have to repay. Why would we protect her?" "We are not protecting her," I countered, releasing his wrist but keeping my hand hovering near the phone. "We are protecting ourselves. You need to think like an auditor, not an angry son." I outlined the disastrous consequences of an immediate police intervention. If law enforcement arrived, they would initiate a criminal investigation into the forged signature. The lending institution would immediately flag the account for suspected fraud. While that sounds beneficial, banking protocols dictate a total asset freeze during active inquiries. If you report the theft tonight, the bank will lock down your primary checking accounts, your savings reserves, and your investment portfolios, I warned. You will lose access to your own capital while a detective spends 12 months trying to prove a family member committed the crime. Juries hate familial disputes. Defense attorneys twist those cases into civil misunderstandings. Travis lowered the phone, his shoulders slumping under the invisible weight of the legal reality. The trap was intricate. Patricia had woven her deceit so tightly into his personal affairs that exposing her would inadvertently strangle his own liquidity. "So we just let her steal from me?" he asked, a bitter edge lacing his words. We let her hire workers to destroy our home and send me the invoice. No, I replied, my gaze locking onto his. We let her assume the liability. We execute a cleaner strategy. I reminded him of the protective shield I had established years ago. The deed to the property was held securely within a single-member limited liability company. Only my name appeared on the state registry. Travis held no legal ownership of the physical structure. Therefore, he could not authorize any encumbrances against it. The home equity line of credit is unsecured, I revealed, revealing the fatal flaw in Patricia's plan. The bank issued the funds based on your credit score, but they failed to verify the actual property deed. The underwriter made a critical error. The debt exists, but it cannot be attached to this house. I outlined the next phase of the operation. We could not reveal our discovery. We had to allow the matriarch to return from her luncheon, believing her facade remained impenetrable. We would permit the contractors to initiate the demolition. We would watch her order imported materials and sign exorbitant catering contracts. We must force her to bind her own name to the physical destruction I explained. Every contractor agreement she signs cements her personal liability. We isolate the fraudulent loan, let her exhaust the capital, and then we sever the connection. Travis absorbed the tactical blueprint. His logistical mind recognized the elegant brutality of the approach. He placed his smartphone onto the marble surface. The anger in his eyes shifted, transforming into a cold, calculating resolve. He was no longer the devoted child. He was a willing participant in the audit. "When does she return?" he asked. "Any minute," I replied, stepping away from the counter. "We need to smile. We need to play the defeated hosts." The sound of a private car pulling up to the curb drifted through the front window. The matriarch was arriving home, ready to claim her kingdom. The real work was about to begin. The headlights of the private car swept across the living room wall, casting long, distorted shadows through the blinds. The vehicle idled at the curb. I heard the muffled sound of doors closing and the distinct click of designer heels navigating the concrete walkway. Patricia and Shelby were returning from their extravagant luncheon, undoubtedly fueled by expensive wine and the thrill of their perceived victory. Travis stood rigidly by the kitchen island, his breathing shallow and rapid. He stared at the brass doorknob, waiting for it to turn. The betrayal was still raw, a fresh wound stinging with salt. He had spent his entire life striving to meet his mother's exacting standards. He chose a lucrative corporate career, he dressed in tailored suits, and he maintained a pristine reputation to secure her approval. Discovering that she viewed him merely as a line of credit to be drained and discarded threatened to shatter his composure entirely. His fists clenched at his sides. I could see the impulse building within him. He wanted to march to the entryway, tear open the door, and hurl accusations into the warm evening air. He wanted to drag those heavy boxes of fragile fine china onto the driveway and shatter them against the asphalt. He wanted a chaotic, loud confrontation to match the internal turmoil ravaging his mind. I stepped directly into his line of sight, blocking his path to the foyer. "Loud loses," I whispered, repeating the mantra that governed my professional existence. Paper wins. I placed a steadying hand on his forearm, feeling the tense muscles coiled beneath the fabric of his shirt. In the escrow industry, reacting with emotion is the fastest route to a costly settlement. When a rival attorney attempts to intimidate you with aggressive correspondence, you do not shout back. You review the statutes, you locate the procedural error, and you quietly file a motion that dismantles their entire case. "We cannot afford a temper tantrum," I instructed, my voice calm and authoritative. "If you confront her now, she will deny the forgery. She will claim the pre-approved offer was a joint decision, a misunderstanding. She will cry and manipulate the narrative, making you look like an unstable son attacking a helpless widow. We need her to feel secure enough to keep spending." Travis closed his eyes, taking a deep, uneven breath. He nodded slowly, forcing his logic to override his instinct. He picked up his briefcase and retreated down the hallway toward the master bedroom, just as the front door handle clicked open. Patricia breezed into the foyer, bringing the scent of expensive floral perfume and roasted garlic with her. Shelby trailed close behind, carrying a glossy folder filled with catering menus and linen swatches. The matriarch did not bother to announce her arrival. She acted as though she held the master key to the castle. She spotted me standing near the kitchen, wiping down the marble counter with a damp cloth, the picture of domestic servitude. "Good evening, Reagan," Patricia chimed, her tone dripping with artificial sweetness. "I trust you had a productive afternoon at your little desk?" Shelby and I accomplished so much today. The event planner was simply delighted by my vision for the gala. I offered a tight, polite smile. "It sounds like a massive undertaking, Patricia. I am sure it will be a night to remember." "Indeed it will," she replied, turning her attention to the bare walls she had conquered earlier. I excused myself from the interaction, citing a need to review pending files before dinner. I retreated to my home office, ensuring the door clicked shut behind me. The initial skirmish was avoided, but the real warfare required meticulous preparation. I sat at my desk and pulled a fresh manila folder from the lower drawer. I grabbed a sharp black marker and wrote Hall versus Hall on the tab. I opened my laptop and initiated the quiet audit. The strategy hinged on a crucial legal firewall I had constructed long before Patricia ever viewed me as a threat. When Travis and I became engaged, I was already a seasoned escrow officer, navigating the treacherous waters of real estate disputes. I had witnessed countless marriages dissolve into bitter asset wars, where warring spouses held family homes hostage to extract maximum leverage. I refused to expose my sanctuary to such vulnerability. Before we exchanged vows, I purchased this property using capital derived entirely from my independent savings. More importantly, I did not list the deed under my personal name. I funneled the transaction through a single-member limited liability company. The LLC is a distinct legal entity, entirely separate from my marital status. Travis holds zero equity in the corporation. His name appears nowhere on the foundational documents, the tax filings, or the county registry. Patricia, ignorant of the complexities of corporate structuring, assumed the residence was a traditional marital asset. Because her son resided within its walls, she deduced he possessed borrowing power against the structure. She believed forging his signature on the municipal permit and the banking application secured her scheme against the physical property. She was disastrously mistaken. The house was a fortress. The bank could never foreclose on a property owned by an LLC to settle a debt accrued by an individual who held no stake in the company. However, the shield was not entirely impenetrable. I pulled up the state statutes regarding construction law. While the bank could not seize the house, the laborers physically altering the structure possessed a different set of rights. Texas law strongly protects tradesmen. If a contractor performs work on a property and the client fails to render payment, the contractor can file a mechanic lien against the real estate. It does not matter if the person who hired them forged a signature. If the lumber is installed and the drywall is demolished, the property itself becomes the collateral for the unpaid labor. Patricia was utilizing stolen funds to initiate a $50,000 remodel. But, knowing her penchant for extravagance, I anticipated she would authorize upgrades, custom finishes, and imported materials that would quickly exhaust the $75,000 fraudulent loan. When the stolen capital ran dry, the contractors would turn to the property owner for the remaining balance. They would attempt to attach their invoices to my LLC. I needed to sever that liability immediately. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line to my personal real estate attorney, a shrewd litigator named Marcus. He answered on the second ring, accustomed to my late evening inquiries. I briefed Marcus on the situation, omitting the emotional betrayal and focusing solely on the exposure to the title. I detailed the forged municipal permit, the unauthorized demolition scheduled to commence, and the inevitable shortfall in contractor compensation. I need to insulate the corporation, Marcus, I stated, staring at the blinking cursor on my computer screen. You need a notice of non-responsibility, he confirmed, his voice carrying the crisp cadence of a seasoned professional. It is a preemptive strike. Marcus explained the procedure. A notice of non-responsibility is a formal, legal declaration filed by a property owner stating they did not authorize the construction occurring on their premises and will not be held financially liable for the resulting debts. By filing the document before the first hammer swings, the owner shifts the entirety of the legal burden onto the individual who contracted the labor. Draft it, I instructed. I want it filed with the county clerk the moment the courthouse opens tomorrow morning. I will have the digital copy in your inbox within the hour, he promised, ending the call. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, letting out a slow, controlled exhale. The legal snare was set. We were going to allow Patricia to move her belongings into the guest suite. We were going to watch her parade through the halls, dictating orders to plumbers and electricians. We would permit her to spend every stolen dollar she had extracted from her son's stolen identity. Let her hire the decorators. Let her rent the imported French chairs for her absurd high society gala. Let her promise exorbitant bonuses to the caterers to ensure her event rivaled the finest gatherings in the state. She believed she was building a new empire upon the ruins of my marriage. She failed to realize she was standing at the bottom of a deep legal trench, furiously digging her own grave. The Austin elite would arrive to celebrate her triumph, only to witness a catastrophic collapse. I reviewed the printed IRS tax lien and the foreclosure auction notice resting on my desk. The auction date for her Westlake mansion was approaching with terrifying speed. The timeline was tightening. A sharp knock on the office door interrupted my strategic planning. Reagan Patricia called out, her voice muffled by the solid wood. "Dinner is ready," we ordered from that new Italian bistro downtown. "Come join us in the dining room. We have so much to discuss regarding the gala preparations." I gathered the official documents, the pink neon paper, and the credit reports and locked them securely inside a fireproof safe hidden behind my bookshelf. I spun the combination dial, scrambling the numbers. I smoothed the wrinkles from my skirt, adjusted my posture, and opened the door. It was time to step back onto the stage and play the role of the submissive, accommodating host. The quiet audit was complete. The execution phase was about to commence over a plate of imported pasta. The Italian bistro takeout was merely a prelude to the true performance Patricia had orchestrated. 4 days after she forged the municipal permit, she announced her intention to host an intimate gathering. She framed it as a necessary test run for the upcoming Austin Heritage Society Gala. In reality, it was a strategic deployment of psychological warfare designed to establish her dominance over my territory in front of an essential audience. She invited 4 influential wives from the country club. These women were the gatekeepers of local high society, forming a powerful social cartel that dictated reputations and controlled invitations across Travis County. If Patricia could successfully subjugate me in front of this specific tribunal, her narrative of the helpless son and the negligent daughter-in-law would solidify into accepted fact. I arrived home from the escrow firm on Thursday evening to find my dining room transformed. The mahogany table was draped in heavy cream linen. Tall taper candles flickered in crystal holders, casting a warm, flattering glow across the fine china Shelby had unpacked earlier in the week. A private chef hired for the evening was busy searing duck breast in my kitchen, utilizing the appliances Patricia intended to demolish within days. The guests arrived promptly at 7. They swept into the foyer wrapped in cashmere and smelling of expensive gin. Patricia greeted them with open arms, her violet-inked Mont Blanc pen visibly tucked into the pocket of her tailored blazer, a brazen display of her hidden weapon. I did not retreat to my office. Avoiding the confrontation would signal defeat. I chose to attend the dinner, playing the role Patricia expected of me. I became the passive, accommodating host. The humiliation began before the first course was served. Reagan darling Patricia called out from the head of the table, her voice carrying clearly over the ambient classical music playing through the sound system. "The ice bucket is looking dreadfully low. Could you be a dear and fetch some fresh cubes from the kitchen? We do not want Evelyn's cocktail getting warm." Evelyn, a woman whose husband owned a massive commercial real estate portfolio, offered a sympathetic, tight-lipped smile. "I am sure Reagan is terribly exhausted from her long hours at that little desk job," Evelyn remarked, turning her attention back to the matriarch. "It is so generous of you, Patricia, to step in and manage the household logistics. Travis must be so relieved." I did not flinch. I did not offer a sharp retort defending my senior position at a prestigious title firm. I simply smiled, a serene, unbothered expression that betrayed none of the legal artillery I held in reserve. "Of course, Patricia," I replied, my tone perfectly measured. "I will get the ice right away." I walked into the kitchen, retrieved the silver bucket, and filled it with fresh cubes. I returned to the dining room and placed it carefully on the table. The conversation flowed around me, an endless stream of country club gossip and upcoming charity events. I assumed the role of the silent servant, pouring chilled Chardonnay into crystal goblets while they dissected the lives of their peers. Travis sat rigidly near the foot of the table. He wore a crisp dress shirt, but the collar appeared suffocating. His gaze remained fixed on his plate, his jaw muscles clenching with every condescending remark his mother delivered. He was a man accustomed to leading boardrooms and dictating logistics for global supply chains. Being forced to witness his wife demeaned in her own home while pretending to tolerate the abuse required an agonizing level of self-control. He gripped his silver fork so intensely his knuckles turned stark white under the candlelight. He wanted to erupt. He wanted to stand up, flip the elegant table, and expose the staggering federal tax lien currently sitting in the fireproof safe behind my bookshelf. I caught his eye as I poured wine into the glass next to his plate. I offered a barely perceptible shake of my head. The subtle gesture conveyed a clear command: hold the line. Patricia, oblivious to the silent communication passing between us, leaned forward to address the table. Her eyes gleamed with the thrill of holding court. "I am simply thrilled about hosting the Austin Heritage Society Gala here next month," she announced, raising her goblet in a mock toast. "The event planner has secured the most divine imported Venetian chairs, and we are transforming the living space entirely. The renovations begin on Monday." One of the guests, a woman named Margaret, arched an eyebrow in mild surprise. "Renovations so close to a major event. That sounds terribly stressful, Patricia, and quite the expense." Patricia waved her hand, dismissing the concern with a practiced, aristocratic flutter. "Oh, it is nothing, darling. The family trust is sparing no expense. Travis and I decided this house needed a proper touch of Texas elegance. It is an investment in our legacy." The irony was thick enough to choke on. The listener and I shared a delicious, clandestine secret suspended right above the candlelit table. We knew the family trust was a desolate wasteland. We knew the Internal Revenue Service was actively hunting her assets. We knew her sprawling Westlake mansion, the crown jewel of her perceived status, was mere weeks away from the foreclosure auction block. She was sitting in a house she did not own, bragging about money she had stolen, utilizing a forged municipal permit to authorize demolition she could not afford. She was constructing a monument to her own arrogance, relying entirely on the silence of the woman she was actively attempting to ruin. It was a masterclass in delusion. The private chef served the main course, placing plates of seared duck and truffle risotto before the guests. Patricia continued her monologue, detailing the exorbitant floral arrangements she had ordered and the premium champagne she intended to serve at the gala. Every boastful claim she made, every expensive vendor she named, was another thread added to the snare. She was publicly binding herself to the financial obligations of the upcoming event. When the fraudulent loan inevitably ran dry, these wealthy, influential women would serve as unimpeachable witnesses, confirming Patricia had personally authorized and commanded the expenditure. "This little starter home has potential," Patricia remarked, gesturing vaguely at the crown molding. "It just needs someone with the proper vision to unlock it. Do you not agree, Reagan?" The table fell silent, anticipating my reaction. The guests watched me, analyzing my response to determine if the matriarch's narrative of the unstable defensive wife was accurate. I set the wine bottle down on a silver coaster. I looked directly into Patricia's eyes, maintaining my serene expression. "I completely agree, Patricia," I said, my voice carrying a terrifying calm. "Vision is crucial. It is amazing what a thorough renovation can reveal about a property's true foundation. I am very much looking forward to seeing exactly what you build here." Patricia beamed, misinterpreting my statement as total capitulation. She turned back to Evelyn, launching into a detailed description of the custom cabinetry she planned to install. The dinner party concluded near midnight. The guests departed, showering Patricia with air kisses and promises to rendezvous at the country club the following morning. They left convinced the matriarch had successfully conquered the household, establishing a new regime of high society elegance. I stood in the foyer watching the taillights of their luxury sedans fade into the dark residential street. Travis approached from the hallway, loosening his tie with an aggressive yank. The forced restraint had exhausted him, leaving a residual tremor in his hands. "How much longer do we have to play this game?" he asked, his voice tight with suppressed rage. Listening to her brag about a trust fund while spending money stolen from my credit profile is making me sick. "Not much longer," I replied, locking the heavy oak door and engaging the deadbolt. The trap is set. The contractors arrive on Monday to begin the demolition. I walked toward my office, needing to review the final execution timeline. The test-run dinner party had served its purpose. Patricia felt invincible. She believed her social standing was secure and her financial fraud was undetected. She was marching blindly toward the edge of a sheer legal cliff. But before she took the final step, resulting in her spectacular ruin, her daughter would attempt to launch a desperate, aggressive maneuver of her own. The morning after the dinner party carried the stagnant, heavy humidity typical of late August. I stepped out the front door holding my leather briefcase and a travel mug of black coffee. The sun was already bleaching the color from the concrete driveway. My plan was to drive to my downtown office and review the title reports for a commercial closing, but my sister-in-law had other intentions. Shelby leaned against the driver's side door of my sedan, blocking my entry. She wore premium activewear and oversized sunglasses, shielding her eyes from the morning glare. In her manicured hand, she held a pristine manila envelope. Her posture radiated an unearned arrogance fueled entirely by the perceived victory of the previous night. She believed the passive performance I delivered during the dinner meant I was a defeated woman ready to retreat. "Good morning, Reagan," she chirped, her tone bright and brittle. "Do you have a quick minute?" I stopped a few feet away, keeping my grip on my briefcase. "I am heading to the firm, Shelby. What do you need?" She tapped the manila envelope against her thigh. "Mom and I were talking after the guests left. We noticed those luxury apartment brochures you left on the kitchen counter yesterday. It breaks our hearts to see you so stressed. We know this environment is becoming difficult for you, and we want to help facilitate a smooth transition." She extended the envelope toward me. I did not reach for it. My eyes remained fixed on her face. "Inside this envelope is a cashier check for $20,000, drawn directly from the family trust," she explained, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "Consider it a relocation fund, a fresh start. All Mom asks in return is that you sign the attached quitclaim deed, relinquishing your marital interest in the property. You take the money, you secure a beautiful downtown lease, and you walk away from Travis, quietly, without dragging him through a messy public divorce." I stared at the pristine envelope, calculating the sheer absurdity of the proposition. A quitclaim deed is a legal instrument used to transfer whatever interest the grantor holds in a property. It offers no warranties. Shelby and Patricia assumed that offering me a meager $20,000, a laughable fraction of Austin real estate equity, would entice me to abandon my home. They still believed the fraudulent family trust possessed liquid capital. They had no idea I spent the prior evening reviewing the pink IRS tax lien hiding in my fireproof safe. Furthermore, they demonstrated a spectacular ignorance of property law. Signing a personal quitclaim deed would accomplish nothing, because Reagan Hall did not own the property. A single-member limited liability company owned it. They were trying to buy a house from the wrong entity, using stolen money they did not actually possess. I glanced down at Shelby's arm. Hanging from the crook of her elbow was a limited edition designer handbag worth at least $6,000. She was offering me a buyout equivalent to 3 of her purses in exchange for a $500,000 asset. I offered a brief, polite smile, maintaining the facade of the overwhelmed wife. "That is a very generous gesture, Shelby. However, my schedule is incredibly demanding today. I do not have the bandwidth to review legal documents right now. I will need to pass on the relocation fund." Her smug expression faltered, her sunglasses slipping slightly down the bridge of her nose. "Reagan, do not be stubborn," she warned, the artificial sweetness evaporating. "Mom has retained elite counsel. If you force us to litigate this, you will walk away with nothing. Take the check." I stepped around her, unlocked my car door, and slid into the driver's seat. "Have a wonderful morning, Shelby," I said, pulling the door shut. I reversed out of the driveway, leaving her standing on the hot concrete, clutching her useless envelope. The interaction provided a brief moment of dark amusement, but as I navigated the morning commuter traffic, a dangerous inconsistency began gnawing at my analytical mind. The arrogance Shelby displayed bothered me. It was not the insult of the lowball bribe that triggered my suspicion. It was the unshakable confidence underlying their strategy. They believed they held airtight leverage. They were operating under the assumption that the municipal building permit taped to my garage door validated their control over the residents. That yellow document was the linchpin of their delusion. But how did they secure it? My background in escrow dictates that every transaction possesses a fail-safe. In Travis County, obtaining a structural remodel permit requires the applicant to submit proof of ownership. A municipal clerk must access the county registry, verify the deed matches the applicant, and stamp the approval. The deed to my home clearly listed a corporate entity. Travis Hall, the forged name on the application, did not match the recorded owner. A standard clerk would have rejected the filing instantly, citing a title discrepancy. Patricia bypassed a rigid bureaucratic checkpoint. She managed to secure a government-issued document utilizing a forged signature on a property her son did not own. That requires more than a violet pen. That requires an inside connection. I arrived at my office tower, rode the elevator to the 14th floor, and walked straight to my desk. I bypassed my pending commercial files and booted up my computer. I utilized my professional credentials to access the secure municipal zoning database. I typed the permit number from the yellow document into the search bar. The digital record populated on my screen. I scrolled past the forged signature and the demolition parameters until I reached the authorization footer. I needed to see the name of the government employee who approved the fraudulent paperwork. The digital stamp belonged to a junior permit expediter named Chloe Vance. I opened a secondary browser window and cross-referenced her name with local social registries. The connection surfaced within 3 minutes. Chloe Vance was the 24-year-old daughter of Margaret Vance, one of the influential country club wives who attended our test-run dinner party the previous night. The mechanics of the corruption were glaringly obvious. Patricia did not submit her application through the standard public queue. She utilized her country club networking to circumvent the rules. She likely cornered Margaret over a round of golf, spinning a fabricated tale about needing to fast-track a surprise renovation for her busy son. Margaret placed a call to her daughter at the zoning office. The junior clerk, eager to please her mother's wealthy friend, bypassed the mandatory deed verification, pushed the paperwork through the system, and issued the yellow permit without a single title check. Patricia had weaponized her social circle to corrupt a municipal process. This presented a significant tactical vulnerability. If Patricia possessed a loyal ally within the zoning department, she could potentially manipulate future inspections or bury the inevitable code violations the contractors would incur. I needed to seal off that avenue of escape immediately. I had to sever her connection to the local government without alerting her to my interference. I opened a blank text document and began drafting a correspondence. I did not address it to the junior clerk. I addressed it directly to the city manager and the director of the Travis County Ethics Commission. I formulated a precise, objective complaint. I attached a digital copy of the fraudulent permit and a certified copy of my limited liability company deed. I outlined the glaring procedural failure, detailing how a junior expediter bypassed mandatory verification protocols to approve a structural demolition on a corporate-owned asset based on an unauthorized signature. I requested an immediate internal audit of Chloe Vance and her recent approvals, citing a severe breach of municipal integrity. I did not request the cancellation of the specific permit. I needed the yellow paper to remain active so the contractors would swing their sledgehammers and bind Patricia to the financial debt. I simply ensured that the moment the internal investigation launched, the junior clerk would face suspension or termination. I hit send, watching the encrypted email leave my outbox. The trap was fortified. Patricia's last remaining ally within the city infrastructure was neutralized. She was flying blind, operating a fraudulent construction project with no safety net. The board was perfectly set, and the demolition was scheduled to begin in 3 days. I felt a surge of cold satisfaction, knowing I had dismantled her logistical support from my desk chair. But my satisfaction was premature. I underestimated the sheer desperation of a bankrupt woman watching her empire collapse. Realizing I had rejected the $20,000 bribe, Patricia decided the passive tactics were insufficient. She concluded that destroying my home was not enough. To force my surrender, she needed to destroy my ability to fight back. Before I could leave the office for my lunch break, a certified letter arrived at the reception desk that would elevate the warfare to a terrifying new level. The adrenaline from neutralizing the corrupt zoning clerk had barely faded when the receptionist tapped on my glass door. Susan held a thick manila envelope bearing a certified tracking sticker. In the title industry, certified mail delivered during the lunch hour rarely contains good news. It usually signifies a sudden legal hurdle, a delayed closing, or a disgruntled buyer threatening litigation. I signed the green receipt card thanking her before returning to my desk. I slid a steel letter opener under the paper flap. A heavy document slid onto my blotter. The seal pressed into the top center of the page belonged to the State of Texas Escrow Licensing Board. My lungs seemingly forgot how to draw air. I read the opening paragraph, and a cold, static sensation spread across my chest. The board was issuing a formal notice of inquiry. They had received an anonymous whistleblower grievance regarding my professional conduct. The complaint alleged I was deliberately mishandling local property titles, altering deed transfers to favor personal contacts, and engaging in unethical financial kickbacks. The second page contained the true danger. It stated that due to the severe nature of these allegations, the Regulatory Committee was considering a temporary administrative freeze on my operating license, pending a full investigation. My hands rested flat against the wooden desk. The paper trembled slightly, caught in the air current from the ceiling vent. This was no longer a territorial dispute over a house. Swapping photographs, bolting a vanity to the guest room wall, and forging a municipal permit were domestic skirmishes. Those actions threatened my comfort and my property equity. But an attack on my state license was an attempt to eradicate my identity. I had spent 12 grueling years building this career. I started as a junior processor, untangling messy rural boundaries for hourly wages. I studied late into the night, passing rigorous state examinations to earn my senior credentials. My reputation in the Austin real estate market was built on an unbroken record of immaculate ledgers and unquestionable integrity. If the board suspended my license, I could not legally authorize a single transaction. My income would halt instantly. My clients would scatter to rival firms. The career I constructed from the ground up would collapse in a matter of days. The strategy behind the letter was ruthlessly clear. Patricia realized the $20,000 buyout failed. She recognized I was not intimidated by Shelby offering a lowball exit strategy. So the matriarch decided to cut off my supply lines. If the daughter-in-law possessed no income, she could not afford to hire private counsel. She could not sustain a protracted legal battle over the residence. Financial starvation would force my surrender. She expected me to panic. She wanted me to sit in my office, hyperventilating, envisioning a future where I lost my livelihood. She assumed a regulatory threat would shatter my disciplined exterior, forcing me to crawl back to the kitchen and accept whatever terms she dictated. But Patricia made a fatal miscalculation. She assumed a bureaucrat handles pressure the same way a high society socialite does. She forgot that she was attacking a professional auditor. When you threaten an escrow officer with fraudulent paperwork, you are stepping into their arena. Paperwork always leaves a trail. Anonymous digital submissions are never truly anonymous. I folded the regulatory notice and placed it into my briefcase. I told my managing partner I needed to take the remainder of the afternoon to address a sudden family emergency. I drove back to my neighborhood, my mind functioning like a high-speed processor, sorting variables and plotting algorithms. I pulled into the driveway, noting the absence of Shelby and her luxury vehicle. The house was entirely silent when I unlocked the front door. Patricia was likely attending another luncheon or shopping for imported fabrics to decorate the impending gala. Their absence provided the exact window of opportunity I required. I bypassed the kitchen and walked straight into the utility closet housing the central network router. Every device connecting to a home wireless network leaves a distinct digital footprint. I carried my laptop to the utility shelf, plugged a direct Ethernet cable into the back of the modem, and accessed the administrative console. The state board utilizes an online portal for whistleblower submissions. The certified letter listed a precise timestamp marking when the anonymous grievance entered their system. The document stated the file was received on Tuesday evening at 8:15. I navigated through the dense traffic logs stored within the router interface. I filtered the data, narrowing the parameters to Tuesday evening. I isolated the active device history during that specific 15-minute window. The digital ledger revealed 3 devices tethered to the network at 8:15. My work computer, Travis, and his smartphone, and a tablet registered under the name Patricia. I dug deeper into the transmission packets. The data showed my laptop was accessing a commercial streaming service. Travis was answering corporate emails through a secure virtual private network. Patricia and her tablet, however, were transmitting data to a specific external server. I copied the destination protocol and ran a standard directory trace. The server belonged to the state of Texas regulatory domain. The traffic log showed her device remained connected to the whistleblower portal for 22 minutes, culminating in a data packet submission at exactly 8:15. The Internet Protocol address matched flawlessly. The anonymous concerned citizen claiming I was manipulating property deeds was sitting on my living room sofa, drinking my wine, while attempting to destroy my life. I did not storm through the house screaming her name. I did not hurl the tablet against the wall. A loud reaction dissipates leverage. I methodically exported the metadata. I captured the router logs, the media access control address of her device, and the corresponding submission timestamps. I compiled a bulletproof digital dossier proving the grievance originated from a relative currently residing in my home. I returned to my office desk and began drafting my response. I did not write a defensive plea begging the committee to believe my innocence. I wrote a sterile, factual correspondence addressed directly to the fraud division of the licensing board. I attached the exported metadata logs. I provided a brief summary of the ongoing domestic hostility, explaining the complaint was a fraudulent, retaliatory strike orchestrated by a bankrupt family member attempting to extort real estate equity. I concluded the letter by citing the specific chapter of the Texas Penal Code that categorizes filing false regulatory reports as a punishable offense. I formally requested the board redirect their investigative resources toward the fraudulent submitter. I pressed send, dispatching the encrypted packet to the state authorities. I closed my laptop feeling a profound shift in my internal architecture. The residual desire to maintain a polite facade vanished. My mother-in-law had crossed a sacred boundary. She attempted to burn down my professional sanctuary to warm her own desperate hands. The war was officially total. There would be no more fake apartment brochures or subtle misdirections. I was going to strip her of every single illusion she held. I would let her build her magnificent gala upon a foundation of stolen money, and then I would detonate the ground beneath it. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of cold water. I stared at the large custom island resting in the center of the room. The smooth quartz surface gleamed under the pendant lights. I knew its pristine condition was temporary. Tomorrow morning, the contractors would arrive armed with heavy tools and forged authorizations. I knew I had to let them swing. I had to stand by and watch the physical destruction of my home to ensure the financial trap closed securely around Patricia. The sledgehammers were coming, and I was ready to welcome them. This brings the timeline rushing forward, converging on the morning the air filled with the sharp, destructive sound of tearing wood and shattering quartz. I stood in my own driveway, sipping dark coffee from a ceramic travel mug. The Texas morning heat was already radiating upward from the asphalt. A large white commercial van bearing the logo of a premier Austin remodeling firm was parked crookedly near my mailbox. The rear doors hung wide open, exposing a chaotic jumble of power tools, heavy-duty extension cords, and thick plastic debris tarps. Beside me stood Travis. He was dressed for his logistics firm, wearing a sharp gray suit, but he remained frozen on the concrete. He stared through the large bay window, offering a clear, unobstructed view of the kitchen interior. Inside, Patricia operated like a manic symphony conductor. She wore a tailored linen pantsuit completely inappropriate for a construction zone, waving her arms and issuing rapid-fire commands. Two burly contractors, clad in heavy work boots and protective eyewear, surrounded the massive custom island occupying the center of the room. The structure was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, featuring deep mahogany cabinets and a flawless expanse of white quartz. It was the place where Travis and I shared morning coffee, where we organized our schedules, where we forged our partnership. One of the workers hoisted a long-handled sledgehammer, resting the heavy steel head over his shoulder. He looked toward Patricia, awaiting the final authorization. She nodded, offering a triumphant, sweeping gesture. The worker swung. The steel head collided with the side paneling, unleashing a deafening crack that echoed through the entire neighborhood. The solid wood splintered outward, raining jagged shards across the polished hardwood floor. A second worker stepped forward, utilizing a heavy pry bar to wedge beneath the thick quartz countertop. With a coordinated heave, they fractured the stone surface, sending a massive chunk crashing down into the cabinets below. A cloud of fine white plaster dust erupted, filling the air and settling over the surrounding surfaces. Travis flinched. The physical destruction of the space felt viscerally violent. He was watching a sanctuary he helped finance, a home he assumed provided safety, being violently dismantled by strangers, obeying the commands of a woman, utilizing stolen money. The sheer audacity of the scene, the aggressive erasure of our shared history, threatened to overwhelm his disciplined restraint. He took a sharp breath, his shoulders dropping into a combative stance. He took a sudden aggressive step forward toward the front door, his hand reaching for the brass handle. He intended to charge into the dust cloud, demand the workers drop their tools, and expose the entire fraudulent operation. I moved faster. I dropped my ceramic mug onto the hood of my car, ignoring the spilled liquid, and grabbed his upper arm. My grip was unyielding, an iron clamp digging into his bicep. I pulled him back, forcing him to halt on the concrete walkway. "Let them carry the debt they ask for," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the recurring sounds of demolition inside the house. He turned his head, glaring at me. The frustration in his eyes was agonizing to witness. "They are destroying our home, Reagan." He hissed the words, trembling with suppressed fury. "She is standing in there, tearing apart the kitchen we paid for. How much more do we let her break before we end this?" I maintained my tight grip, refusing to release him. I forced him to look past the emotional violation and focus on the cold, mechanical reality of the situation. "Every time that hammer connects with the wood, she owes another $1,000, I reminded him. "Every hour those men remain on the property, driving screws and ripping out plumbing, she sinks deeper into a financial trench she can never climb out of. If you stop them now, the invoice remains manageable. A judge might show leniency. We need the debt to become insurmountable." Travis stared through the window, watching a shower of debris fall onto the floor. The logic of my strategy wrestled violently against his protective instincts. It is incredibly difficult to watch an adversary destroy something you love, even when you know their actions guarantee their eventual ruin.
In the realm of escrow and title disputes, emotional attachments are a profound liability. If you allow sentiment to dictate your maneuvers, you will inevitably sacrifice leverage. A seasoned negotiator understands that sometimes you must allow the opposing party to demolish a wall so you can ultimately possess the entire estate. "You filed the non-responsibility notice," he asked, his voice tight, seeking reassurance. "It was stamped by the county clerk 72 hours ago," I confirmed. "The limited liability company is fully insulated. The corporation will not pay a single cent for this demolition. The bank cannot attach the stolen equity line to the deed. The only person legally tethered to the destruction occurring in that room is the woman currently ordering it." Travis swallowed hard, the tension slowly draining from his rigid posture. He offered a curt nod, acknowledging the tactical necessity of our silence. He adjusted his suit jacket, picked up his briefcase, and walked toward his vehicle. He drove away to manage global supply chains, leaving his personal domain in the hands of hostile forces. I remained on the driveway, watching the process unfold. The contractors worked rapidly, efficiently dismantling the central fixture. They hauled massive chunks of debris out the front door, tossing them into a rented dumpster parked near the curb. I watched a fine layer of plaster dust drift through the hallway, settling directly onto the mahogany console table. It coated the silver frames Patricia had so eagerly hung, obscuring her youthful debutante smile under a thick, gray film. It was a painful morning. Watching strangers rip apart a space designed for comfort requires a unique type of endurance, but I knew the gaping wound they were carving into the center of my residence was a necessary sacrifice. By noon, the contractors finished the primary demolition phase. They departed for a lunch break, leaving the front door propped open. I stepped inside, surveying the aftermath. The kitchen felt hollow, stripped of its function and warmth. Exposed wiring hung loosely from the ceiling joists. Rough, jagged edges marked the floor where the custom cabinetry once rested. Patricia stood near the sink, running a manicured finger along the remaining countertops. She turned, recognizing my presence. She did not offer an apology for the noise or the mess. She merely smiled a predatory, confident expression. "It is going to be spectacular, Reagan," she announced, gesturing toward the vacant space. "The caterers require an open floor plan to properly manage the flow of the gala. The new chef suite will provide a marvelous backdrop for the guests. Do not worry, we will have the debris cleared before the event." I offered a slight acknowledging nod, my face a mask of serene indifference. "I am sure the Austin Heritage Society will appreciate your dedication to their comfort, Patricia. The open concept certainly makes a statement." She hummed a note of agreement, turning back to her architectural blueprints. She believed she had won. She believed the physical destruction of my kitchen signaled my ultimate surrender. She was preparing to host 80 members of local high society inside a hollowed-out shell, relying on a forged permit, a stolen line of credit, and a fractured reality. She had perfectly set the stage for her magnificent social triumph. But an empty stage is a dangerous place to stand when the audience discovers the performance is a fraud. I gathered my belongings and headed toward my office. The demolition phase was complete. The fraudulent capital was rapidly depleting. The foundation of her delusion was cracking under the weight of the incoming invoices. The countdown to the Austin Heritage Society Gala had officially begun, but Patricia remained oblivious to the fact that her grand event was scheduled to collide directly with a catastrophic deadline imposed by a regional banking institution. The morning of the highly anticipated Austin Heritage Society Gala arrived, bringing with it a frantic, suffocating energy. I descended the staircase at 8 o'clock, clutching a small leather overnight bag. I stepped into a residence that had been entirely unrecognizable. The raw, gaping wound left by the demolished kitchen island remained, but Patricia had employed aggressive cosmetic strategies to conceal the destruction. Florists swarmed the living room, operating with the urgent precision of a military unit. They hauled massive urns filled with imported cascading orchids and rare white lilies. The scent of damp earth and aggressive floral perfume was overwhelming. A team of decorators, directed by an anxious event planner, hauled heavy velvet drapes across the bay windows, blocking out the Texas morning sun. They arranged gilded Venetian chairs in neat rows, transforming my comfortable suburban home into a ridiculous imitation of a 17th century palazzo. It was an opulent, desperate facade, constructed entirely on credit that did not legally exist. I navigated around a frantic caterer carrying a tray of polished silverware. Patricia stood near the foyer entrance holding a clipboard checking off deliveries. She wore a silk robe, her hair already styled into an elaborate, stiff updo. She glanced up as I approached the door, noting the leather bag gripped in my hand. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across her features. She believed the sight of the luggage signaled my ultimate retreat. She assumed I was fleeing the premises, unable to endure the magnificent social victory she was about to secure. "Leaving before the guests arrive?" she asked, her tone laced with patronizing pity. "Probably for the best, Reagan. It is a very exclusive crowd this evening. The Heritage Society expects a certain pedigree. You never quite fit in with this tier of society anyway. It would save everyone a great deal of embarrassment if you absent yourself." I stopped near the console table, where the violet Montblanc pen still rested beside the dusty photograph frames. I looked at the matriarch, observing the frantic hubris radiating from her posture. I did not respond with a defensive remark regarding my career or my own financial stability. I did not engage in a petty argument over social standing. Instead, I offered a warm, genuine smile. It was the kind of smile you grant a competitor who has confidently pushed their chips into the center of the table, completely unaware you are holding an unbeatable hand. "I am just staying at a hotel downtown tonight, Patricia," I replied, my voice smooth and unbothered. "The preparations seem chaotic, and I have early meetings tomorrow. You enjoy the evening. The house is all yours." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, unsettled by my lack of resistance, but her arrogance quickly compensated. She offered a dismissive wave of her clipboard, turning her attention back to the frantic decorators. I stepped out the front door and walked to my car. I placed the overnight bag onto the passenger seat and checked the digital clock on the dashboard. It was exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. The dramatic irony of the moment was intoxicating. Patricia was currently standing in the center of a foyer she did not own, directing laborers she could not pay to decorate a property she would never possess. She was obsessing over the placement of imported orchids, believing she was solidifying her legacy. She was entirely oblivious to the brutal legal reality unfolding across town. At that precise moment, standing on the sun-baked concrete steps of the Travis County Courthouse, a designated auctioneer was speaking into a megaphone. He was reading the legal description and the parcel numbers belonging to her sprawling Westlake estate. While she adjusted velvet drapes, her actual residence, her true claim to the elite status she so desperately craved was officially transferring ownership. The gavel was falling. The bank was recouping their losses. The highest bidder was signing a cashier check. Patricia was no longer a wealthy widow enduring a temporary cash flow issue. She was legally, officially, and undeniably homeless. I started the engine and drove out of the neighborhood, but I did not head toward the downtown hotel. I parked my sedan in the shaded lot of a nearby coffee shop, maintaining a clear line of sight down the residential street leading to my property. I ordered a black coffee and waited patiently for the next phase of the operation to commence. At 11 o'clock, a nondescript gray van rolled past my vantage point, turning onto my street. The side panels lacked any commercial logos. The driver, an independent locksmith I frequently utilized for complicated foreclosure evictions, parked discreetly near the rear alleyway behind my house. I had provided him with a detailed schematic of the property and a strict set of instructions. The caterers, the decorators, and Patricia were entirely consumed by the chaotic preparations occurring in the front living spaces. The rear access points were unmonitored. The locksmith worked with silent, swift efficiency. He bypassed the kitchen entrance, navigating to the exterior doors. Within 45 minutes, he had extracted the existing tumblers and installed high-security commercial-grade deadbolts on every exterior access point. He slipped back into his van and drove away,
leaving the occupants completely unaware that the physical boundaries of the residence had been fundamentally altered. They were busy preparing for a gala inside a structure they could no longer freely enter or exit without my explicit permission. I spent the afternoon running standard title audits from a remote server, ensuring my professional obligations remained fulfilled. The hours ticked by methodically. The Austin heat peaked and began a slow, gradual descent as the late afternoon shadows lengthened across the parking lot. At exactly 4 o'clock, a dark sedan pulled into the coffee shop lot, parking directly adjacent to my vehicle. A man wearing a rumpled suit stepped out, carrying a thick, sealed manila envelope. He was a registered process server, a professional courier whose daily routine involved delivering devastating news to unsuspecting individuals. He approached my window, verifying my identity, before handing the heavy package through the glass. I broke the seal and slid the contents onto the passenger seat. The documents were crisp and intimidating. The first stack consisted of the certified auction transfer proving the Westlake estate sale finalized earlier that morning. The second stack was even more crucial. It contained the formal mechanic lien filings initiated by the furious contractors, who finally realized the initial deposit checks Patricia issued had bounced aggressively. The trap was fully cocked. The mechanisms were locked into place. The stolen capital was exhausted. The structural damage was complete. The municipal corruption was exposed, and the true property deed remained securely insulated. I drove to the downtown hotel, checked into my reserved room, and placed the thick envelope onto the desk. I ordered a light dinner from room service, though my appetite was entirely suppressed by the impending confrontation. I walked over to the large window overlooking the sprawling Austin skyline. The sun was beginning its final descent, dipping below the horizon and painting the clouds in bruised shades of purple and orange. The city lights flickered to life, illuminating the dense network of highways and high-rise towers. Somewhere in a quiet suburban neighborhood, 80 influential members of local high society were donning tailored tuxedos and expensive evening gowns. They were climbing into luxury vehicles, preparing to attend a magnificent gala, hosted by a woman they believed represented the pinnacle of grace and financial stability. They were driving toward a meticulously constructed illusion. I checked my watch. It was 6:30. The event was scheduled to commence at 7. I possessed the documents, I possessed the new keys, and I possessed the absolute unwavering truth. I remained standing by the window, watching the darkness settle over the city, waiting for the exact right moment to shatter the facade. At 7 o'clock, the quiet suburban street outside my property transformed into a congested artery of luxury vehicles. Valets hired with stolen funds sprinted back and forth along the asphalt, collecting key fobs for imported sedans and high-end sport utility vehicles. 80 of the wealthiest, most influential gossips, developers, and socialites in Travis County descended upon the residence. They stepped out of their climate-controlled cars, adjusting silk ties and smoothing expensive evening gowns, eager to witness the magnificent architectural triumph Patricia had promised them. I was not there to greet them. I was sitting in a high-rise hotel room miles away, watching the city lights multiply across the dark horizon. But Travis was there. He stood quietly in the shadowed periphery of the dining room, observing the orchestrated delusion unfold. He wore a dark tailored suit, his hands clasped firmly behind his back. He was the silent sentry watching a theater troupe perform a play on a stage rigged with explosives. Through the subsequent accounts he provided and the evidence I later compiled, the atmosphere of the evening was a masterstroke of desperate vanity. Patricia held court in the center of the living room, standing beneath a rented crystal chandelier. She wore an emerald green ball gown that swept across the hardwood floor. To the untrained eye, she looked every bit the wealthy matriarch. But a seasoned observer would notice the hem was slightly uneven, indicating the garment was rented rather than custom-tailored for her frame. She gripped a crystal flute of premium champagne, utilizing her free hand to gesture grandly toward the various floral arrangements and velvet drapery. The guests mingled, sipping cocktails and exchanging hushed critiques of the decor. Eventually, their eyes inevitably drifted toward the gaping, unlit cavern adjacent to the main entertaining space. They stared at the exposed ceiling joists, the raw drywall edges, and the splintered floorboards where my custom island once anchored the room. Patricia did not shy away from the visual anomaly. She leaned into it, relying on her refined country club charisma to spin the destruction into a narrative of visionary progress. "We are currently in transition," she announced to a cluster of prominent real estate developers, her voice projecting a melodic, artificial confidence. The previous layout was simply too restrictive for proper entertaining. I told Travis we must open the space, modernize the footprint. "We are installing a professional chef suite. You simply cannot build a proper family legacy without enduring a little construction dust along the way." The developers nodded politely, murmuring their agreements, while discreetly calculating the cost of such an endeavor. Patricia beamed, absorbing their validation. She signaled the string quartet playing in the corner to lower their volume and stepped onto a small elevated platform near the fireplace. She raised her champagne flute, commanding the attention of the entire room. She delivered a speech regarding legacy. She spoke eloquently about the importance of establishing permanent roots in a rapidly changing city. She praised her son for stepping into his role as the head of the household, and she proudly proclaimed that the residence would serve as the enduring foundation for their family property for generations to come. Travis listened to the monologue, his jaw locked so tightly his teeth ground together. He listened to his mother build a kingdom of lies, relying on his stolen credit and his wife's stolen home. He endured the suffocating hypocrisy until his gaze drifted away from the speaker and settled upon the ornate mantelpiece above the fireplace. Patricia had arranged a series of silver frames across the marble ledge, but she had placed a centerpiece directly in the middle. It was a large professional canvas, a family portrait taken 3 years prior during a holiday gathering at the Barton Creek Resort. Travis stared at the image, and the final thread of his familial loyalty snapped. The portrait had been digitally altered. In the original photograph, I stood directly beside my husband, my arm linked through his. In the canvas currently displayed to the Austin elite, I had been literally cropped out. The digital editor Patricia hired had erased my physical presence entirely, utilizing cloning software to replace my figure with a seamless background of a stone garden wall. It was the ultimate insult. It was not merely a physical displacement or a financial theft. It was the absolute erasure of my existence from his life. She was presenting a manufactured reality to the world, declaring that I had never mattered, never contributed, and never belonged. Travis reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew his smartphone. He did not confront his mother. He did not shout over the string quartet. He opened his messaging application and typed 3 words. My phone vibrated against the hotel desk, cutting through the quiet hum of the air conditioner. The screen illuminated, displaying the text message from my husband. "It is time." I picked up the device, read the brief command, and placed it into my pocket. I did not need to adjust my makeup or check my reflection. I was not wearing an evening gown or a cocktail dress. I wore my armor. I was dressed in a charcoal gray tailored business suit, a crisp white silk blouse, and black stiletto heels. I picked up a dark leather folder containing the certified municipal records, the foreclosure auction receipt, and the corporate property deed. I left the hotel, retrieved my sedan from the parking garage, and drove through the dark city streets. The traffic was light, allowing me to navigate the urban grid with cold, calculated precision. I did not feel anxiety. I felt the steady, rhythmic pulse of an auditor about to balance a corrupted ledger. I arrived at my neighborhood 30 minutes later. I did not pull into my own driveway. I navigated down the narrow rear alleyway, backing my vehicle into a shadowed alcove, hidden from the street view. I walked up the rear pathway toward the kitchen entrance. The security lights illuminated the heavy wooden door. I reached into my pocket and retrieved the new brass key provided by the locksmith I hired that morning. I slid the metal into the newly installed commercial deadbolt. The mechanism turned with a satisfying, heavy click. I pushed the door open and stepped into the raw, exposed construction zone of my ruined kitchen. The space was functioning as a staging area for the frantic catering staff.
Waiters in crisp white shirts rushed past me carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres and empty champagne flutes. They skirted around the exposed plumbing pipes and piles of sawdust. None of them stopped to question my presence. My attire and my demeanor projected unquestionable authority. In a room full of panicked service workers, a woman in a sharp suit holding a leather folder is always assumed to be the person in charge. I navigated through the debris, stepping carefully over a loose floorboard. The ambient noise of the gala grew louder with every step. I could hear the delicate soaring notes of the string quartet, the clinking of crystal glassware, and the low rhythmic hum of 80 wealthy individuals engaging in polite social networking. I reached the threshold separating the kitchen from the formal dining area. I paused for a fraction of a second, gripping the edge of the leather folder. Then I stepped out of the shadows and walked directly into the blinding light of the living room. My stiletto heels struck the polished hardwood floor, emitting a sharp, rhythmic clicking sound that pierced through the soft classical music. The sensory shift in the room was immediate and profound. It began at the periphery. A real estate developer standing near the hallway stopped speaking, his eyes tracking my movement. The silence rippled outward, traveling from person to person like a wave crossing a quiet pond. The murmurs died. The polite laughter evaporated. Even the string quartet, sensing the sudden vacuum of sound, faltered their bows, hovering uncertainly over the cello strings. Within 10 seconds, the entire room fell dead silent. 80 pairs of eyes locked onto the woman in the charcoal suit, interrupting their opulent fantasy. Patricia was standing near the fireplace, recounting a fabricated story to Evelyn and Margaret. She noticed the sudden hush and turned her head, a look of mild irritation crossing her features. Her eyes swept across the crowd and landed directly upon me. The socialite mask dropped instantly. The aristocratic grace she had projected all evening shattered, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pale, ashen hue against the vibrant emerald green of her rented gown. Her knuckles turned white around the stem of her champagne flute. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, the words escaping her throat in a ragged, desperate whisper that carried clearly across the silent room. I did not stop walking. I crossed the floor, my gaze locked onto hers, until I reached the center of the living room. Travis stepped out from the shadows of the dining room and took a position directly beside me. He offered a brief, firm nod, signaling his absolute alignment with the execution. I looked at Patricia, and then I turned my head, slowly scanning the faces of the influential guests, the country club gossips, and the civic leaders who had gathered to celebrate her fabricated legacy. "I am just here to drop off some paperwork for the tenant," I said clearly. The word tenant hung in the stagnant air of the living room. It was a calculated legal classification designed to strip Patricia of her perceived authority and redefine her status in front of the exact audience she was attempting to manipulate. I did not wait for the collective gasp to subside. I unclasped the brass button securing the dark leather folder. The smooth cover fell open, revealing the stack of certified documents resting inside. "First," I announced, projecting my voice clearly enough to reach the back corners of the room where the service staff hovered, "I need to address the contractors, the caterers, and the event planners currently operating within this residence." I retrieved the top document from the stack. It was a certified copy of the warranty deed, displaying the raised seal of the Travis County Clerk. I held it up, not waving it frantically, but displaying it with the calm authority of an auditor presenting undeniable evidence. "I am Reagan Hall, the sole managing member of the limited liability company that holds the exclusive title to this property," I stated, my tone entirely devoid of emotion. "I did not authorize this event. I did not authorize the structural demolition occurring in the adjacent room." I pulled out the yellow municipal permit, the one Patricia had taped to my garage door, and held it next to the deed. "The woman who hired you secured this permit by forging an unauthorized signature. My legal counsel has already filed a formal notice of non-responsibility with the state registry. This corporate entity is legally insulated. We will not render payment for a single invoice associated with this gathering
or the preceding renovations. The silence that had previously gripped the room fractured violently. A sharp collective intake of breath rippled through the Austin elite. A murmur of genuine panic erupted from the back of the room where the head caterer and the lead floral designer stood. They were suddenly staring at thousands of dollars in unpaid labor and ruined inventory. The lead contractor, a burly man wearing a polo shirt who had supervised the sledgehammer demolition, pushed his way through the crowd of silk and velvet, his face flushed with sudden, aggressive concern. He looked at Patricia, his eyes narrowing. "You told me the bank cleared the deposit," he demanded, his voice cutting through the rising whispers. Patricia stepped backward, her heel catching on the hem of her rented emerald gown. She opened her mouth to issue a denial, to weave a soothing lie, but her throat restricted. The aristocratic facade she relied upon for decades disintegrated, leaving behind a terrified, desperate woman. "Reagan," she gasped, her voice trembling violently. "How dare you create this scene? You are ruining the gala." "I am not ruining anything, Patricia," I replied, sliding the deed back into the leather folder. "I am simply clarifying the ledger." I reached back into the folder and retrieved the secondary payload. I pulled out the heavy pink cardstock, the bright neon hue instantly drawing the eyes of every real estate developer and banking executive in the room. They recognized the color code. They knew exactly what type of financial catastrophe required that specific shade of paper. I did not hand the documents to her. I stepped forward, closing the physical distance between us, and pressed the heavy sheets flat against the polished surface of the mantelpiece, resting them directly beneath the digitally altered family portrait, where my image had been erased. Second, I continued ensuring the entire room heard the final, devastating truth. "We need to address the timeline of your residency." I tapped my index finger against the top document. "This is a notice of federal tax lien issued by the Internal Revenue Service against your personal assets. And the document resting beneath it is a certified auction receipt finalized at 10 o'clock this morning on the courthouse steps." I looked directly into her eyes, watching the pupils dilate in pure, unfiltered terror. "Your sprawling estate in Westlake, the property you have spent the entire evening boasting about, no longer belongs to you." I stated the words landing like physical blows. "The bank repossessed the deed to satisfy your outstanding debts. You are officially, legally, and undeniably homeless." The room erupted. The polite murmurs escalated into shocked, chaotic chatter. The Austin elite, the gatekeepers of local high society, recoiled, physically stepping away from Patricia as though she carried a highly contagious pathogen. In their world, financial ruin is the ultimate sin. A poor person is unfortunate, but a bankrupt fraud attempting to infiltrate their ranks utilizing stolen money is an unforgivable offense. They stared at her with expressions of sheer, unadulterated horror. She was no longer the graceful matriarch of a prominent Texas family. She was a destitute imposter caught attempting to squat in her daughter-in-law's residence. Shelby broke through the crowd, her oversized designer sunglasses discarded, exposing her panic-stricken eyes. She rushed to her mother's side, grabbing Patricia's arm defensively. "She is lying," Shelby shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate, echoing against the high ceiling. "Do not listen to her. Reagan is a bitter, vindictive liar trying to embarrass us. Mom, tell them she is lying." Patricia stared at the pink documents resting on the mantelpiece. She could not speak. The undeniable reality of the official state seals and the bureaucratic ink paralyzed her vocal cords. I turned my attention to Shelby, offering a look of profound pity. "Legal documents do not lie, Shelby," I said quietly, "and neither do bank ledgers. I suggest you check the balance of the family trust you tried to bribe me with yesterday morning." Shelby froze, the color draining from her face as she finally comprehended the magnitude of the collapse. The $20,000 check she offered me, the luxury SUV she drove, the expensive porcelain she hauled into my guest room, were all funded by an illusion that had just violently shattered. I did not raise my voice once during the entire execution. I did not utilize dramatic gestures or hurl personal insults. I did not demand apologies for the stolen photographs or the malicious country club gossip. I simply presented the audited facts and allowed the truth to perform the necessary violence. The paperwork acted as a guillotine, severing Patricia from her social standing, her financial remaining leverage, and her false sense of authority in a single, precise motion. But the execution was not complete. The social ruin was absolute, but the financial mechanics of her trap still needed to snap shut. The contractors and the event staff, realizing the woman who hired them was completely insolvent, were preparing to launch their own desperate offensive to recoup their losses. Patricia was about to discover that when you operate entirely on fraudulent credit, the collection methods become incredibly aggressive. The collective shock paralyzing the living room rapidly mutated into aggressive self-preservation. The Austin elite possess an acute survival instinct when confronted with financial contagion. The moment they processed the reality of the pink foreclosure notice resting on the mantelpiece, they began executing a synchronized retreat. Whispers of outrage and disgust circulated through the crowd as the socialites turned their backs on the ruined matriarch. They abandoned their half-empty champagne flutes on side tables and swiftly navigated toward the foyer. The stampede was orderly but desperate. No one wanted to be photographed or associated with a destitute fraudster during a fraudulent gala. They retrieved their silk wraps, bypassed the rented Venetian chairs, and poured out the front door, eager to reclaim their vehicles from the valets and erase the evening from their social calendars. As the wealthy guests evaporated, the true danger materialized from the periphery of the room. The service staff, the individuals whose livelihoods depended on fulfilled contracts, did not flee. They advanced. The lead contractor, the burly supervisor who previously orchestrated the destruction of my custom kitchen island, pushed past a retreating real estate developer. His face was flushed with a dark, volatile anger. He possessed the physical presence of a man accustomed to demanding compliance on rugged job sites. He marched directly toward Patricia, stopping mere inches from her trembling figure. He held a crumpled invoice in his calloused hand. "I checked the routing number on the deposit check you handed me yesterday," he barked, his voice devoid of any polite restraint. "My bank flagged it an hour ago. Insufficient funds. You owe my crew $12,000 for the demolition phase alone. And you just heard the lady say the LLC will not cover a dime." Patricia shrank backward, clutching the fabric of her rented emerald gown. She looked like a cornered animal, realizing the trap had entirely enclosed her. She desperately scanned the room, searching for an escape route or a sudden influx of capital to soothe the furious laborer. Her eyes frantically darted past the contractor and landed on Travis. Travis remained standing rigidly beside me. Throughout the entire execution, he had maintained a stoic, impenetrable silence. Patricia locked onto him, her maternal instincts twisting into a desperate, manipulative plea. "Travis, please," she begged, her voice cracking under the immense pressure. "Tell them there has been a misunderstanding. Write them a check from your personal account. We can sort out the trust issues tomorrow. Just handle this before they call the authorities." She expected the dutiful son to shield her. She relied on decades of established behavioral patterns, assuming his desire to avoid public embarrassment would force him to absorb her financial collateral damage. She believed his loyalty to his mother would override the logic of the fraudulent home equity line of credit she had forged in his name. Travis did not reach for his wallet. He did not issue a calming directive to the hostile contractor. He slowly turned his head and looked at the ornate mantelpiece. He stared at the digitally altered family canvas resting directly above the pink foreclosure notices. He observed the smooth, artificial stone wall that occupied the space where my body was supposed to reside. He looked at the visual evidence of his mother's meticulous effort to erase his wife from his history. The final remnants of his filial obligation dissolved. "You replaced my wife," he stated, his voice incredibly calm, but carrying a chilling resonance that echoed through the rapidly emptying room. "You forged my signature, stole my credit, and tried to erase the woman I married from her own home." He reached into his trouser pocket and retrieved a heavy brass object. It was the shiny new key provided by the locksmith I hired earlier that morning. "So, we replaced your locks," he concluded. Travis extended his arm and dropped the brass key directly into my open palm. The metal struck my skin with a cold, definitive slap. The gesture was absolute. He publicly, formally, and legally aligned himself entirely with my audit, severing the matriarch from any access to his protection or his assets. Patricia stared at the key resting in my hand. The absolute finality of the rejection broke her. A ragged sob escaped her throat, and she sank to her knees, collapsing onto the polished hardwood floor. The emerald gown pooled around her, a tragic puddle of rented silk. The lead contractor, however, remained entirely unmoved by the emotional collapse. He slapped his heavy hand against a nearby wooden end table, demanding attention. "I do not care about your family drama," the contractor snarled, looming over the weeping woman. "I care about my invoice. If you cannot produce $12,000 right now, I am calling the sheriff and filing charges for theft of services and municipal permit forgery." I stepped forward, inserting myself between the furious laborer and the ruined matriarch. I did not act out of compassion for Patricia. I acted to ensure the financial checkmate concluded cleanly, without dragging my property into a protracted police investigation. "She cannot pay you," I informed the contractor, maintaining my authoritative volume. "Her liquid accounts are frozen by the Internal Revenue Service, and her primary residence was auctioned 12 hours ago. The check she provided will never clear." The contractor cursed loudly, raising his cellular phone to dial the emergency dispatch number. "Wait," I commanded, raising my hand to halt his action. "The LLC will not pay you, but the individual who hired you does possess assets currently residing within this structure." I looked down at Patricia huddled on the floor, and then I looked at the furious supervisor. In Texas, a mechanic lien allows a contractor to secure payment against the property improved. However, when the contract is proven fraudulent and the property owner is legally insulated, a contractor retains the right to recoup their losses by repossessing the materials and the personal assets utilized to facilitate the fraud. I gestured broadly toward the opulent decorations suffocating my living space. The rented Venetian chairs, the imported crystal chandeliers, the massive floral urns. I listed my voice, echoing like an auctioneer. All of these items were procured utilizing fraudulent credit lines she established. I pointed down the hallway toward the guest bedroom, where Shelby had aggressively unpacked the boxes of fine china. Furthermore, the individual occupying the guest suite possesses an entire wardrobe of premium designer garments, luxury handbags, and antique vanity furniture that was transported onto my property without my authorization. The contractor lowered his phone, a predatory realization dawning in his eyes. He recognized the loophole. If he could not extract liquid cash, he could extract equivalent physical value right off the floorboards. He whistled sharply, commanding the attention of the remaining event staff and his demolition crew, who lingered near the kitchen entryway. "Start loading the trucks," the contractor ordered, pointing a thick finger at the gilded chairs. "Grab the chandeliers, grab the floral displays, grab everything that is not bolted to the actual structure." The scene descended into a brutal, highly efficient repossession. The workers sprang into action, abandoning their trays of hors d'oeuvres. They began stripping the living room bare, hauling the rented furniture and the expensive decor out the front door, and tossing them aggressively into the back of their commercial vans. I turned to Shelby, who remained frozen near the fireplace, watching the chaotic dismantling of her perceived inheritance. "Give him the keys," I demanded, my tone offering zero room for negotiation. Shelby blinked her eyes wide and uncomprehending. "What keys?" she stammered. "The keys to the luxury sport utility vehicle currently parked in my driveway," I clarified, stepping closer to her. "You purchased that vehicle utilizing funds extracted from a depleted trust account. The contractor needs collateral to cover the remainder of his forged invoice. Hand over the keys, or I will personally assist him in dialing the sheriff to report your mother for felony wire fraud." Shelby looked at her mother sobbing on the floor, and then looked at the aggressive contractor advancing toward her. Trembling violently, she reached into her designer purse, retrieved the electronic key fob, and dropped it into the contractor's outstretched palm. The execution was absolute.
The contractors stripped the residence of every valuable item the matriarch had smuggled inside. They cleared the guest bedroom, tossing the designer dresses and the fine china into the back of their trucks. They repossessed the physical manifestations of Patricia's delusion, utilizing the very greed she relied upon to dismantle her entire empire. The Austin elite had fled, the caterers were gone, and the contractors drove away with their extracted collateral. Patricia remained kneeling on the bare hardwood floor, stripped of her rented gown, her stolen credit, and her fabricated legacy. She wept into her hands, completely surrounded by the quiet, devastating emptiness of a house that had finally purged the parasite from its walls. The trap had sprung, the audit was closed, and the final ledger was perfectly, violently balanced. The flashing red and blue lights of a Travis County Sheriff patrol cruiser pulsed through the uncovered bay windows, casting rhythmic shadows across the bare, hardwood floor. The authorities did not arrive in response to a chaotic domestic disturbance. They responded to a routine call regarding municipal permit fraud. 2 uniformed officers stepped through the front door, expecting to find a screaming match. Instead, they walked into a sterile, quiet environment that resembled a corporate boardroom after a hostile takeover. I stood near the mantelpiece holding my dark leather folder. Patricia remained on the floor, her rented emerald gown pooling around her knees. Her sobs had reduced to hollow, exhausted gasps. Shelby hovered nearby, staring blankly at her phone screen, trying to secure a ride-sharing service since her luxury vehicle now belonged to the demolition crew. I handed the lead officer the yellow building permit bearing the forged signature. I provided the router logs, the metadata proving the fraudulent regulatory complaint, and the documentation detailing the stolen equity line. The officer reviewed the paperwork, his expression hardening as he grasped the scope of the identity theft. He looked down at Patricia, resting his hand on his utility belt, preparing to read her rights. I intervened before he could retrieve his handcuffs. "I am the injured party regarding the property," I stated, my voice level and calm. "My husband is the victim of the financial forgery. We are willing to decline pressing formal criminal charges tonight, but we require a specific, immediate resolution." The officer nodded, instructing me to outline the terms. I turned my gaze downward, meeting Patricia's red, swollen eyes. "You will gather whatever belongings the contractors deemed too worthless to repossess," I instructed. "You will pack them tonight. You and Shelby will leave this property within the hour, and you will permanently relocate outside of the Austin city limits. If I ever discover you attempting to access our credit profiles or contacting my licensing board again, I will hand this entire folder over to the federal prosecutor." Patricia offered no resistance. The fight had drained from her marrow. The matriarch who spent her life dictating terms to country club waitstaff and manipulating her family members simply nodded her head in submissive defeat. The exodus was agonizingly pathetic to witness. There were no expensive leather trunks or matching designer luggage sets. Shelby and Patricia spent the next 40 minutes scrounging through the guest bedroom. They shoved their remaining blouses, cosmetics, and toiletries into the exact same black plastic trash bags Patricia had utilized to discard my winter coats 3 weeks prior. The poetic justice of the garbage bags was the final, quiet victory of the night. An economy sedan arrived at the curb, summoned by a ride-sharing application. The driver popped the trunk. Patricia and Shelby hauled their plastic bags down the concrete walkway. The humid Texas night air swallowed them. They climbed into the back seat of the battered sedan, and the vehicle rolled away, fading into the suburban darkness. The sheriff deputies concluded their report, filed the paperwork, and returned to their cruiser. The heavy oak front door clicked shut. The deadbolt engaged. Travis and I stood alone in the foyer. The house was wounded, but it was quiet. The oppressive, artificial energy Patricia imported had evaporated, leaving behind a sterile, restorative silence. The rented crystal chandelier was gone. The imported orchids were confiscated. The gaping hole in the kitchen where our custom island once anchored the room remained exposed, revealing rough floorboards and severed plumbing lines. It was a mess, but it was our mess to rebuild. Travis let out a long, uneven breath. He loosened his silk tie, pulling it free from his collar, and tossed it onto a nearby chair.
He did not offer an immediate apology. Words in that moment would have felt hollow, insufficient to bridge the gap the betrayal had created. He chose to speak through action. He walked past me, his dress shoes echoing in the empty space. He pushed through the heavy fire door, entering the dim heat of the garage. I listened to the sounds of him shifting boxes and moving yard equipment. A minute later, he returned. He carried the large, brushed metal frame containing our wedding portrait. The glass was coated in a thick layer of garage dust and plaster residue from the recent demolition. Travis walked directly to the mahogany console table near the entryway. He set the heavy frame down. He retrieved a microfiber cloth from a nearby drawer. He did not rush the process. He meticulously wiped the glass, clearing away the grime until the image of us, standing together, smiling on our wedding day, shone clearly under the foyer pendant lights. Then he turned his attention to the wooden surface of the console table. Patricia had left behind a crescent-shaped dust ring when she removed our portrait to install her own vintage photograph. It was the physical stain of her invasion, the marker of her attempt to erase my history. Travis pressed the cloth against the wood, rubbing firmly until the crescent shadow vanished entirely. He polished the mahogany until the surface was immaculate. He lifted the brushed metal frame and hung it back on the wall. He adjusted the edges, centering it perfectly over the clean wood. The geometry of the room instantly corrected itself. The narrative was restored. He turned to face me, his expression raw and unguarded. "She will never step foot inside this house again," he promised, his voice carrying a solemn vow. I nodded, accepting the pledge. We turned off the lights and walked up the stairs, leaving the ruined kitchen behind us, ready to start drawing the blueprints for a stronger foundation in the morning. The aftermath of the audit unfolded over the next several months exactly as the paperwork dictated. The Austin Heritage Society Gala became a legendary cautionary tale whispered among the elite echelons of Travis County. The women who attended the test-run dinner party, the socialites who laughed at my expense, now speak my name with a quiet, terrified reverence. The rumor mill regarding my neglectful behavior died a sudden, absolute death. The country club understands a vital new rule. You do not challenge the escrow officer. We hired a reputable remodeling firm utilizing our own verified capital. We reconstructed the kitchen, installing upgraded appliances and a wider quartz island. The new space is brighter, more resilient, and unburdened by fraudulent debt. Patricia and Shelby currently share a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a dense, unremarkable suburb of Dallas. Their days of hosting charity luncheons and dictating high society etiquette are permanently over. The Internal Revenue Service successfully attached a garnishment to whatever meager income they managed to secure, leaving them to navigate the rigid constraints of a working-class budget. Travis maintains strict, unyielding boundaries. He speaks to his mother perhaps twice a year, and the conversations are brief, sterile exchanges devoid of any financial support. He learned the hardest lesson a son can endure, discovering that blind loyalty to a toxic parent is a liability he can no longer afford. My professional license remains immaculate. The State Regulatory Board dismissed the fraudulent grievance the moment my digital metadata proved the submission was a retaliatory hoax. The brass key to my office remains on my keyring, and my name remains etched on the glass door. People in my industry often ask how I maintained my composure during such a profound personal invasion. They wonder how I resisted the urge to scream, to throw objects, to demand immediate chaotic justice when I found another woman trying to steal my home. I always offer them the same truth. Anger is a volatile emotion that blinds you to the mechanics of the trap your enemy is building. When someone attempts to erase you from your own life, raising your voice only proves you feel threatened. It gives them the validation they crave. You do not need to be the loudest person in the room to secure a victory. You just need to be the most prepared. Let them boast. Let them rent the expensive dresses. Let them swing the sledgehammers and sign the fraudulent contracts. Stand back and let them carry the heavy load they fought so desperately to steal. The truth does not require a megaphone. The truth only requires a ledger, a certified deed, and the patience to wait for the auction clock to strike 0. If you ever find yourself boxed out of your own territory, do not waste your breath shouting at the intruder. Just check the paperwork. You would be amazed by the devastating evidence they leave behind the frame. That concludes the story of the Austin Gala eviction. If this narrative reminded you that quiet documentation always defeats loud arrogance, take a moment to secure your own records. Let this serve as a reminder that the strongest defense is a flawless title. If you enjoyed the strategy and the execution, drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Hit the subscribe button to join the Pan of Vengeance community, and I will see you in the next audit.